In the realm of the last video that I just recently published about the tech I bought the last year and that really changed my life, I also considered talking about the books that I read or listened to throughout 2020. Now that's exactly the video that you are watching right now. And for me personally, I mostly read on my Kindle as well as listen to books as well as podcasts through Audible and of course also Overcast as my preferred podcast player. However, this video specifically is not going to focus on podcasts mostly, but instead we are going to talk about books I read this year. Now, this topic specifically came back to my mind because I just recently started a practice again to actually read in the evening as well as in the morning. And for me, I mostly noticed that this practice actually helps me sleep better and unwind after the day's work. Previously, the last months of the corona pandemic, basically, I mostly just was enjoying TV shows as well as movies in the evening with my partner and then just went to bed straight away. And now, with this new practice, there's a good chunk of 15 to 30 minutes of reading in the evening, and I kind of make a point of that reading being a fiction book of some sorts. The book that I am currently reading will be also talked about toward the end of this video, and for now, let's just go through some of the audiobooks as well as Kindle books I have read in 2020. One book that I actually started the year with, or at least in some way started the year with, was rereading sections of The 4-Hour Workweek. Now, this is not necessarily a book that I read through this year. However, rereading sections of it, and I have read this book multiple times in the past, is something that really helped me during this whole crazy year to refocus in some way. And also to again, take those learnings Tim Ferriss shares throughout this book and basically implement those in my own business as well as just work life for the most part. Now, obviously, I'm running a very different business than a 4-hour workweek, creating videos, working for clients, and all those things. However, the ideas are still true, and especially some of the higher level concepts like the 80-20 rule, for example, is something that I really like to be reminded about. And on that note, also, for example, looking back into the Eisenhower matrix, which is a matrix dividing things into important and unimportant as well as urgent and non-urgent. So all of this was sparked basically by reading the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss or rereading segments of it. And I would definitely recommend you check that book out. It's not necessarily the newest book. However, it definitely stood the test of time in the last 10 years with tons of people reading it and also this book being on a number of bestseller lists throughout the years. So that's definitely a book that I would recommend, especially if you want to optimize your work and also your kind of like life in terms of lifestyle design, early retirement. Those ideas were really just at the start, at the time when that book was published, but now it has become more and more popular. And of course, for those ideas like the 80-20 rule. From that, I want to segue over to Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey, and that is actually a book that I didn't know about before hearing him on the Tim Ferriss podcast or the Tim Ferriss show, which is a long-form podcast, and I definitely can recommend that as well. But the Greenlights book by Matthew McConaughey is something that I am listening to even now because it is just so much fun and just experiencing the stories that McConaughey has to share there. And for this book, basically, what I understand from it is that he took a lot of journal entries, which he did over the last 30-something years, and basically gives us some snippets of that. It's kind of like an autobiography, but at the same time, it's not really, and it's more of a philosophical exploration of life as well as different life circumstances, from having an exchange year in Australia over to his family's structure and how all those people interacted with each other. I find it incredibly entertaining, but as well very insightful, and definitely something that is super interesting and also gives you a interesting understanding, at least for me, into the world of a film star, but at the same time also a family that had a growing up situation somewhere in the US, mostly around Texas as far as I remember, and just all that is just really interesting, and I would definitely recommend checking out that book as well. Next up on my list, I have 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan B. Peterson. Now, this book may be controversial for some, and some might just love it as well. I personally think that Jordan Peterson has a very interesting look on many things. I would also say that in some parts I may not agree with what he is writing about or how he is describing certain aspects, but overall it is an absolutely incredible book in terms of looking at your life and thinking about how you want to conduct yourself and giving you ways and tool sets to really reconsider certain aspects of how you are interacting with the world as well as interacting with yourself. Something in particular that I remember from this book, for example, is somewhat of a quote, and I might be butchering this, but basically he writes that you should think about yourself or care for yourself the way that you would care for someone that you love. And that really is something that I find incredibly interesting to have that thought in the back of my mind. And drilling that down a little more, he also describes the same kind of like environment or the same situation with that a lot of people help their dogs more than themselves. So if their doctor prescribes a certain treatment or a certain medicine for your dog, they are statistically very rigorous with that, and they really make sure that their dog gets the medicine. But then on the flip side, when it goes about themselves or the person themselves needs medicine, then they make that stretch a little longer so that they don't need as much medicine and they don't hold true to the prescription that the doctor gave them and those kind of things. So that aspect was something that really was interesting to me, and there are just tons more interesting aspects in this book to help you walk through life a little stronger, I would say. And I really enjoyed that read, and I would definitely recommend checking that out. Now, talking about 12 Rules of Life, I also recently found out that Jordan Peterson wrote a second book kind of as a follow-up to this first one, which is called Beyond Border, 12 More Rules for Life. And obviously I couldn't have read that yet because it's only going to be published early next year, but I'm definitely going to read that in 2021, so that's already on my list for that. Now, stepping back again from the philosophy and kind of like big picture life things, I also read Deep Work, which is a book by Cal Newport, I think, and it's also subtitled Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And I would say that throughout the last year, that is basically what I think happened throughout much of this. Now, for me, I would say this book gave me a couple of tools to really reconsider my work flow as well as my work ethic, and especially the way that I track things. I'm not necessarily perfect at this, and I feel like even though this book hasn't been all that long ago that I read it, I still think that I might be better off rereading it again, because I just now also restarted that test of trying to get even a little better. Something that I noticed throughout 2020 was that with TikTok, Instagram, and all of those things, the distractions are stronger than ever. And especially in the beginning of the corona crisis, checking news was basically constant. And with the book Deep Work, I felt like I had something to grip on to pull me out of that constant drip of information and really refocus on the work that I wanted to be doing. Still not perfect, but getting better every single day, trying a little more, trying a little better, maybe even trying a little less at certain things, at least cutting those out. For me personally, cutting out Instagram, Twitter, and similar things from my phone, for example, has been really helpful. Something I'm still struggling with, however, is the constant consumption of new YouTube videos, because my brain tells me that I am a YouTuber, I am creating YouTube videos, so I should probably know what others are creating, so I'm constantly consuming more and more YouTube videos. And that's still something that I'm working on, because I still believe also that creating more YouTube videos is more valuable than having seen 10 other YouTube videos. But anyways, that's something that I would say deep work has kind of taught me to really consider certain methodologies and techniques to know when are you actually working, when are you doing stuff that does just feel like work, but it's not actually your work, and how you can all tally that up and get overall better at your work. And in that way, it also can trickle over into your lifestyle. Now, another book on my list that is kind of liked and disliked a lot around in the internet is Think and Grow Rich. Now, I didn't really read Think and Grow Rich this year. That was a couple years ago. However, I did read Think and Grow Rich, The Legacy this year. Now, this book is an account of people, past and current, that are using this methodology of Think and Grow Rich, and basically how they're building wealth in the world, and of course also helping themselves, but also obviously all other people around by doing whatever they're doing. Something that I specifically remember is a story about a blind man, for example, that through the learnings of Napoleon Hill with the Think and Grow Rich audiobook, I think to remember, that he basically got the strength to finally do something with his life, or do more with his life. And one of those things that he did was build a television network that provides the audio descriptive version of films and TV shows, as well as news and similar things. And that became a national success at the time. Now, what I took away from this book is basically that not necessarily you can just sit there and think and grow rich, but you just have to have the mental capacity open for that to even be a possibility. And that's something that I feel like more and more people could really benefit from, to be in the belief that something is actually possible and that you can just step out there and make it happen. And if you just don't have that, then how are you going to go forward anyways? So Think and Grow Rich or Think and Grow Rich, The Legacy are two books that I would recommend on that note, and I still think they're a great read, and I might even go back to Think and Grow Rich in 2021 to read that again, to basically go back to those basics also. Now, I have two more books on this list, specifically on the kind of like non-fiction side, and those are Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, as well as Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday. Now, the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, something that I have read in the past and I am also constantly kind of rereading in between, also mixing between that, the Daily Stoic, also by Ryan Holiday. And those two books, Meditations and Daily Stoic, are my way of getting into the Stoicism philosophy and learnings, as well as just the way that they are treating life, thinking about life, and also how decisions are made in that kind of thought process. And that's something that I think is really interesting to dive deep into, because it is something that is so long gone. The whole world of Marcus Aurelius is thousands of years ago, but still to this day, much of what he is writing about is very, very interesting and very, very accurate or needed for a lot of the situations that you may find yourself in. And for me, I think it's an interesting practice to keep updating myself, my brain, my way of being, my thought processes and such things with books like these. And on the more current side of things, the Stillness is the Key book, which is one of the newer releases from Ryan Holiday right now, is something that I am really, really enjoying. There is so much good in there that really I find recentering in a way. This is a book that I have about 50% read at this point, and I'm absolutely happy that I picked it up. And right now it is my morning practice to read in that book when I get up, basically. The last few chapters have really given me more insight into how important it is to put away the digital every now and then, or at least the distractions of that digital world. And for me, that's my phone. And something I've been continually doing since the start of last year, and I think even for the past 2 years or something like that, is trying to pull myself out of the world of Twitter, Instagram, and similar fast-paced media, as I have mentioned before in this video. It's really something to try to get my head out of that constant I have to refresh world, because it's not really that necessary to have all the most up-to-date information, even though the companies are trying to really hook us in, especially nowadays with the 24-hour story format where things go away right after you haven't seen them, and you really have to check in every single day. And unlearning that process, noticing that you're going to get all the necessary information anyways. People 20 years ago were able to get information even though they have not been on Instagram, because it didn't exist at the time. And 2000 years ago, even then, decisions were made and processes were working. And so trying to unlearn that, trying to decelerate myself, step away a little more to become someone who is in the driver's seat of their life. And I think that those things are really helpful for me. And Stillness is the Key is one of the books that I find helpful while in that process. Now, the last book I want to mention is the book that I am currently reading as my nighttime routine. And it is called Limit, and it is by Frank Schätzing. This here is the German version. I, at the time when I first read this book, actually got it autographed right here, but maybe you can't see that. Anyways, this is a book that has over 1,200 pages, and they're super thin. And right now I'm kind of switching back and forth, because here I have the English one on my Kindle, and then I have the German one here in paperback. And this, as I mentioned before, is my nighttime routine at the moment. And it has been a really interesting journey to get that feeling back. It almost feels like I'm a grandpa of sorts when I sit in bed with my partner and she's reading her book, I'm reading my book. But what it does is that it helps me decelerate my brain for the night, to slow down, not think about anything, or try to think about less things. And as an addition, I also started bringing my notebook as well as my fountain pen, also having those next to the bed, so that when I do think about something or want to take note of something or have an idea, that I can just jot it down and get it out of my brain onto paper, trying to, again, distance myself from speedy action, from screens, as well as from that constant access to information. The cool thing that I found specifically with reading something like this book right here, this is a book that I have read about 10 years ago or something like that. And I do think that I have even a note right here at the end where I finished reading the book for the first time. And I made a note on the date as well as my thoughts. Yep, this is 2010 in December on the 30th at 1 p.m. I finished reading this book in my basically winter holiday. And that has been a game changer, because it was the thickest book that I have read or had read up until this point. And it's still the thickest book that I have read to this point now, even though I have read many more books in between. This was a great success for me when I was about 20 years old, to have finished this thick of a book, this intricate of a story, this interesting of a fiction book, a world that was completely unconceivable at the time. And something fun about this book is that I also went to a reading from the author at the time in Leipzig, and basically he answered one of those questions, which was, why did you choose the time that this book plays at? Because basically this book has a story about China, the US, as well as oil on planet Earth and the resources on planet Earth. But also there's a space elevator that brings people to the space station, and from there they then can travel to the moon. And there's a hotel on the moon that people can actually go to or start going to. And most of this book is placed around 2025. And the fun thing is that when this book was released around 2008, I think, something around that corner, basically the idea was 2025 is so far away that you can't really imagine how the world would look like, especially considering that from 2008, 20 years prior to that, we didn't even have proper internet. And so that was a huge shift. So 2025 was far away, and you couldn't really think about what that world might be like. And now this book has a storyline about that, has interesting things going on. And if you read this in 2008 or even 2010 when I finished reading it, 2025 was far enough so that you couldn't really think about what it was like, but it also was near enough that I knew most likely I'm going to be alive at that point. And reading this book now, we are obviously much further down in the timeline. Now it's 2020, coming up 2021. 2025 isn't all that far away. And from now on, I, at this time, think that we're probably not going to hit the incredible feats that were possible with this, but we're really darn close with the Artemis program to go back to the moon, with SpaceX and the Starship going to space and Mars and such things. It's quite incredible to even think that all of those things have been made possible at this point or are being made possible. So this is a book that distracts me from my day-to-day going-ons, and maybe this book can do the same thing for you. And I will have links to all the books that I've mentioned throughout this video in the description below, linking to Amazon. And of course, I will also have a link to Audible, with which you can get up to 2 audiobooks for free when you sign up for their 30-day free trial. So all of those things are going to be in the links in the description below. If you have any favorites out of the list of books that I mentioned in this video, I would love to see a comment about that in the comment section down below. And of course, also if you have questions about the books that I have read here, you can also leave a comment about that. Like this video if it was helpful for you, and so that I can know more about what you like if this video was interesting for you. And of course, subscribe my channel for more videos like this, as well as on other topics, and there are a ton of them. Of course, there will also be other videos that you can watch on the screen in the end card. And with all that said, I hope you have an amazing time of this year right now. Have a reflective time that you can look back on 2020 and see the good next to all the craziness that was going on. And without further ado, I hope you have an amazing week. I hope you have an amazing rest of 2020, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.